Hey guys, in this video I will discuss Hilary Putnam's internal realism, which he also called pragmatic realism because it has pragmatic elements, as we will see in the presentation. First of all, Putnam distinguishes between metaphysical and internal realism. Metaphysical realism, according to Putnam's critique, is characterized by three core tenets. First, the world consists of a fixed totality of objects independent of the mind. The second one says there is one true description of the way the world is. And the third one says truth involves a kind of correspondence relationship between words and external things. According to Putnam, this is an externalist perspective and assumes a God's eye point of view. God's eye point of view is in which we try to tell the real shape or nature of the objects or the world. However, our knowledge should be appropriate for humans and not gods. Our world is a human world, Putnam says, and he opposes the perspective of God's eye and instead defends internal realism. Now let's look at the core thesis of the internal realist. According to internal realism, the question, what objects does the world consist of, is meaningful only when asked within a theory or description. Secondly, there are multiple true theories or descriptions of the world. And third, truth is not correspondence with facts, independent of mind or discourse, but rather a kind of idealized rational acceptability. Now, the first thesis of internal realism says that the world is not ready made. We slice or carve the world into pieces like objects, properties, facts, or causal relations, and these are relative to our theories or conceptual schemes. And the second thesis asserts the plurality of truths. There can be more than one truth, and this directly contradicts the second thesis of metaphysical realism that says there is exactly one true and complete description of the world. The third thesis of internal realism says that truth is not an unmediated match to a mind independent world. It is a belief that has been perfectly justified through an ideal process of human inquiry. I will talk about this in a minute, but for now, let's try to understand the central idea behind internal realism. Putnam doesn't like the idea that what is mental is less real than material things. He expresses this with the slogan, the mind and the world jointly make up the mind and the world. So, both the world and the mind are real, and each contributes to the existence of the other, right? So, there is a contribution of the mind to what we call reality, but also there is a contribution of the world too. And in fact, this idea is as old as Kant. Kant believed that concepts and categories played a constitutive role in the reality of nature. Trying to imagine things in themselves is meaningless. Oops, sorry. And there is only the world of human experience, and the true objectivity that science can truly discover belongs to this world. For this reason, Putnam says Kant can be called the first internal realist. What Putnam calls metaphysical realism corresponds to what Kant calls transcendental realism, and they both reject it. Kant made a synthesis that Putnam likes very much. To understand this, we need to know the conflict between Locke and Berkeley. I can't go into the details of these two in this video, but the basic conflict between the two is this. Locke said that there are real objects out there, independent of us, and we learn about them through sense experience. Berkeley said that matter or objects do not exist independently, only minds and their ideas exist. And Kant's synthesis was he accepts empirical realism, so objects can be real for us. They are real as appearances or phenomena, but not outside us in the sense of being things in themselves. He says that space and time are preconditions for perceiving objects, not empirical facts themselves. So we can measure objects' positions experimentally, but space and time exist as frameworks within us, not independently. And why does Putnam feel close to Kant? Because Kant said that what we call objects are always constituted within a scheme. And all our knowledge is about this, right? Our knowledge is about phenomena. And there are also noumena, or things in themselves, but we can't have any knowledge of these. This is why he says Kant can be considered the first internal realist. He also says that Kant is the first philosopher really to see that describing the world is not simply copying it. So according to Putnam, Kant was already aware of the shortcomings of the correspondence theory. Now, I think there is another philosopher who will help us understand Putnam's views because Putnam criticizes him. I'm talking about Richard Rorty. Rorty also calls himself a pragmatist, but these two are very different pragmatists. Pragmatism takes Rorty to adopt anti-realism, whereas it takes Putnam to internal realism or pragmatic realism. Rorty's argument is simple. He says, when it comes to the question of what could be true, the answer is sentences, right? Only sentences can be true or false, and sentences can only exist within language. And since language is created rather than discovered, truth is also created rather than discovered. Rorty criticizes the idea that the world determines which vocabularies or theories are true. According to him, when comparing theories, for example, Aristotle's and Newton's theory, there is no external criterion to determine which is more true because we are the ones that create theories and apply them to the world. And sometimes, depending on our goals, they become very successful. Consider other vocabularies such as the vocabulary of romantic poetry or Freud's psychoanalysis. The vocabulary of romantic poetry is useful for expressing emotions and aesthetic experiences, while Freud's vocabulary is useful for understanding unconscious processes. And neither is more correct than the other. They are simply different tools for different tasks. He says that even scientific revolutions are merely metaphorical redescriptions of nature. So even science doesn't have a special place for Rorty. So there's no such thing as the correct or true language. Language is a phenomenon that has emerged at a specific time and for a specific need. We can see that Rorty has a instrumentalist or anti-realist stance for even scientific theories. Different theories are different instruments or tools. They can be used for specific tasks, and where they are deemed unnecessary, these tools can be discarded and new ones can be invented. And by treating language as a tool, Rorty is entitled to reject the idea that truth is about representing reality. Now, Putnam accuses Rorty of making an illegal move from the rejection of metaphysical realism to a total skepticism about the possibility of representation. And so it is at this point that Putnam says empirical realism is important. Even if we have different languages or concepts, it is not possible for these languages themselves to create real things like dinosaurs or mountains or gravity. Since we cannot arbitrarily decide to believe in anything, our beliefs cannot be entirely up to our wishes. Putnam says he agrees with Rorty on the idea that we have no access to unconceptualized reality, but this does not mean that language and thought do not describe anything outside ourselves. So even if things can only be described by using a language, which means we conceptualize the reality, we can still meaningfully talk about realities. So, although things like dinosaurs and gravity are known to us in a categorized or conceptualized way, they are not identical to these concepts or categories, nor can they be considered products of these concepts or categories. And why is that, you ask? Because things also have an empirically real dimensions which play a guiding role in our conceptualization process. And thanks to this empirical reality, we know that our theories may be wrong and that we may say incorrect things about dinosaurs based on the results of certain tests. Now, it's important to mention that Putnam was already a realist. He was a scientific realist first. A scientific realism debate is a debate about whether unobservable entities are just as real as the observable ones. And Putnam was on the realist side, arguing that unobservable entities are just as real as observable entities. He was a scientific realist, and then he shifted to arguing for a position like Kant's position, which is not just about scientific reality, but about reality in general. So he just shifted his focus to a more general debate about objects themselves. His internal realism asserts that no object, whether observables or unobservables, exist in a purely mind independent way, as they are all constituted within a conceptual scheme. Now, Putnam says that the externalist approach is meaningless, and an example of this approach is Kripke. According to Kripke, a term such as water is considered a rigid designator that refers to the same thing in all possible worlds. In this sense, Kripke was a kind of metaphysical realist. And the argument Putnam uses to criticize externalists is called the model-theoretic argument. It's not just one argument, actually, but they all try to refute metaphysical realism. So they are not exactly arguments in favor of internal realism, they are arguments against metaphysical realism. And these arguments, as he himself points out, are related to Quine's argument of the indeterminacy of translation. The idea underlying Quine's argument is this: if there's one way to make a theory true, there are many ways to make it true. Okay, so what does this mean? Quine argued that meaning and reference cannot be determined conclusively. He explains this using the example of Gavagai. To understand this, imagine a translator who finds himself face to face with a member of a tribe that he is completely unfamiliar with. And to begin communicating with this native speaker, the translator must interpret his words. Then a rabbit runs by and the native says Gavagai. Now, considering the rabbit's presence and the native's reaction, the translator records the translation rabbit for Gavagai based on the observed behavior and environmental cues. The translator thinks that he made an accurate translation. And the reason he thinks he made an accurate translation is this: the native says Gavagai when rabbits appear, just as he would say rabbit in the same situation. The translator then continues to verify this translation with some additional evidence He might check if the native says the same thing for every rabbit, maybe. And Quine argues that what we count as behavioral or observational evidence is not enough to distinguish Gavagai as meaning rabbit from other logically possible meanings. Now consider a possible meaning like an unseparated part of a rabbit, such as a rabbit leg or rabbit ear. This meaning or translation is also possible because whenever a rabbit appears, its parts are also present there, right? So all these translation options are consistent with the same evidence. And now moving on to Putnam's argument, I will mention what Putnam calls the permutation argument. This is one of the model-theoretic arguments. Putnam explains it as follows. Imagine that we lay out all the objects in the world along with labels or names on them. Then suppose we shuffle the objects. As long as we don't mess up with the labels, all the statements that were true before the shuffling will still be true after the shuffling. And let's explain this with an example. First, let's assume that metaphysical realism is true, and there is only one true description of the world, and our words refer to objects outside the mind. For example, the word cat refers only to cats and to nothing else. And let's consider the language we use as a system. In this system, words are symbols like cat. World is the totality of objects, and reference is the matching or mapping relationship established between words and objects. The argument says that we can swap or shuffle the objects but keep the labels or the words the same. In this case, for any theory, multiple mapping models can satisfy that theory's truth. Now consider the theory that says the cat is on the mat. The realist will say that there are two specific objects here, namely the cat and the mat. He will say that there is an isomorphism between the words and the objects. So the model or the mapping of the metaphysical realist is the first one here, right? The cat corresponds to the cat, and the mat corresponds to the mat. Now let's keep labels or the names the same, but shuffle the objects in such a way that now the cat corresponds to the cherry and the mat corresponds to the tree. The claim is that the entire theory remains true here. The metaphysical realist asserts that there is one true way our words map to the objects in the world. He thinks that the first mapping is the true correspondence relation between the language and the world. He will say that the words cat and mat refer to specific determinate objects in the world, whereas the permutation argument shows that we can simply swap or shuffle the reference of certain terms in the theory to create a new mapping or a model, and these two models make exactly the same sentences true or false. So specifying the truth values of sentences is not sufficient to secure the reference of the terms in our theory, right? So just looking at which sentences are true is not enough to decide which mapping is the real one. The theory that says the cat is on the mat is true for both models here. If your words can refer either to the cat or to the cherry, and the sentence still comes out true, this means that there are many possible references or correspondence relations, and we can't say which one is the true one. Because whenever I talk about cats, you might be referring to what I call cherries, and vice versa. If I confidently state some cat is on some mat, you would agree that the sentence is true. you would agree because under your system of reference, you think I am saying some cherry is on some tree. So to put it another way, we can reach a total agreement of on the facts of the world or the truth of the sentences we hold, but at the same time we can be talking about entirely different objects, and this is a huge problem for the externalist. And externalists like Kripke struggle to explain exactly what entities in the world we are referring to beyond human languages or conceptual schemes. Putnam, on the other hand, gets away from this problem because an internalist can easily say that the term tree refers to trees or trees as we categorize them, right? So the internal realist is referring to a tree that is not entirely mind independent. And so Putnam is freed from the model theoretic argument because we are not compelled to defend the existence of a single correct reference. And this takes us to some form of ontological relativity. And in fact, Putnam's internal realism defends the thesis of ontological relativity. Yes. Now, I have mentioned the similarity between Putnam and Kant. I said that Putnam draws a parallel between his own internal realism and Kant's transcendental idealism. And the most significant disagreement, however, between Kant and Putnam is Putnam's adoption of the thesis of conceptual and ontological relativity. Kant would never have accepted such a view. According to Putnam, we access the world through our conceptual schemes, which is similar to Kant's idea. But then he goes on to say that conceptual schemes do not come in necessary forms, which is not a very Kantian idea. Putnam says objects do not exist independently of conceptual schemes. Our division or categorization of the world into objects occurs when we introduce a particular descriptive scheme. There can be multiple true descriptions of the world. He defends a pluralism, arguing that there are numerous spheres of interest that determine what we call real in the world. Science, within its own conceptual scheme, can tell a story that differs from common sense, and this story can also be true. Tables and chairs and mountains are just as real as quarks and electrons. The difference is tables exist in the common sense scheme, and quarks and electrons exist in the scientific scheme. And which scheme we focus on depends on our interests and goals. Both are true within their own schemes or frameworks, and this leads to his thesis of conceptual relativity. According to this thesis, there are no facts independent of schemes. Questions such as what is true can only be meaningful within a scheme. Now, one important thing to note here is that Putnam's understanding of conceptual relativity does not mean conceptual relativism. What Putnam is trying to emphasize is that there is no single correct way to divide the world into objects, that the world itself does not dictate a single correct theory for us. He argues that what counts as real depends on our values or interests. We live in a human world, Putnam says, and what it means is the human world is determined partly by our values. And this is a very pragmatist vein as well. Putnam does not defend relativism because he doesn't believe that all conceptual schemes are of equal value. Criteria such as coherence and how well our theories fit to empirical evidence determine how good the schemes are. Now, we said that truth is not correspondence with the facts, according to Putnam. Putnam thinks that although we cannot know the nature of truth in a metaphysical sense, we can have some notion about it, about what it might be. We can have a conception about it. And the concept he uses is idealized rational acceptability. He says that truth is some sort of idealized rational acceptability for the internal realist, and then he further elaborates that this rational acceptability consists of some sort of ideal coherence for beliefs with each other and with our experiences. So, first, our beliefs and theories must cohere with each other, and also our beliefs and theories must cohere with our experience. Here, we are not comparing our beliefs to a independent reality. The coherence he is talking about is within a conceptual scheme, and the experiences that we check our beliefs against are not raw, unconceptualized inputs. They are experiences as represented in our belief system, so they are conceptualized too. This definition treats truth as something that can be justified under epistemically ideal conditions. So a statement is true when epistemic conditions are sufficiently good and a fully competent speaker would approve of that statement. Statements like there is a cat on the mat or the world is round can be true if, under ideal epistemic conditions, rational agents would accept it. You can see that he has a very pragmatic idea of truth because truth is whatever a rational community would in due course find coherent and agree to. And this is very close to Peirce's notion of truth. So a statement is rationally acceptable if you have good reasons and evidence to believe it is true. But this isn't all, right? There is the idealized part, which we need to explain. Idealized means the person must be in the best possible epistemic situation, possessing all relevant evidence, having performed all possible tests, and operating under ideal conditions. And these conditions must be free from error. This theory is warranted by our best methods of reasoning. So the idealization component here is the insistence that the theory must meet ideal epistemic conditions. It must be maximally coherent and justified. Uh, Now, although truth depends on rational acceptability, the standards of rationality are themselves related to the world. What constitutes ideal conditions is determined by how the world actually is, right? They are determined by empirical constraints of how the world works. So, truth is not merely a matter of agreement or consensus, it is something limited by reality. Putnam says that some ideas may be accepted by society, but they may still not be true. And I think it is very important what Putnam is trying to achieve here. His aim when discussing truth and objectivity is to place humans at the center, right? However, in doing so, he does not want to go so far as to arrive at relativism because he thinks that the world does not allow me to believe whatever I want. It imposes empirical constraints or limitations such as coherence. So, truth isn't whatever anyone asserts. It is, uh, it is what an ideal human inquirer or a group of inquirers would be forced to conclude under best circumstances. So truth is not merely what is currently accepted, and this notion of truth allows for the possibility that our current beliefs uh, may be false because they haven't reached that ideal state yet. And at this point, you might ask, isn't this notion of truth just as unreachable as correspondence theory of truth. At least this was what I asked when I first read about it. Well, the answer is yes, but there is a difference. So, as far as I understood, the difference is this. Metaphysical realism says that there is a reality or true answer out there, regardless of whether anyone ever finds it, and truth is the answer that corresponds to that reality. Internal realism says that the correct answer is the one that would be generated and accepted if a perfectly capable group of scientists used correct methods and checked all the steps. So, truth is the result of that ideal inquiry. So, this is an epistemic notion of truth. Whether a statement is true or false depends on what humans can justify. Uh, so it is not mind independent. The ideal state that Putnam is talking about is still human dependent here because it is still structured by our conceptual schemes. Correspondence theory, on the other hand, assumes a single truth that is independent of humans and scientific investigation. But Putnam says no, truth is always the product of human investigation, which includes values and purpose. So he wants to keep truth context sensitive. Truth is tied to human investigation, human practices, human frameworks or schemes, but at the same time, it is not a mere matter of personal opinion, which is relativism. So we can say that some beliefs are better candidates of being true than others because there are shared rational standards. And even though our rational standards include human concepts, the empirical realm restricts us from believing whatever we want. Now, we said that Putnam does not want to shift into relativism and say anything goes, but he wants to say that our constructions are constrained by experience and coherence. And the obvious objection here would be if experience is already conceptually contaminated, then it cannot function as an independent constraint. So Putnam cannot appeal to a mind independent source of constraint. Now, the reason this objection might be raised is because Putnam sometimes talks in a Kant like way and say that noumena is nonsense. He's talking like as if mind independent world equals to Kant's noumenal world. But a realist might come up and say, no, I don't believe this. I don't claim that we know the noumenal world as it is. I only claim that we can judge theories as true or false depending on how reality is, where reality does not depend on our concepts. So a reality that does not depend on our concepts maybe does not have to be Kant's noumenal world. So as you can see here, depending on what type of realism you defend, you may escape Putnam's criticisms. In fact, you may even find his ideas useful if you want to defend a more moderate type of realism, like a pragmatic type of realism. And that's all for that's all for this video, guys. See you again in the next video.